Well, chapter 16 of the book of Exodus now is what we're going to be talking about today. Another interesting chapter. Again, I think this is one of those areas where, about this chapter, most people have pretty much, they stopped telling the story of Moses and the children of Israel. They've left Egypt, and now they don't really talk about it much. So there's a couple things that are interesting that we get to learn in here. One is, of course, Israel murmurs for want of bread and lusts for the flesh pots of Egypt. The Lord rains bread from heaven and sends quails for meat. So some fun things we get to learn with that. Israel is given manna each day except the Sabbath for 40 years. So some really interesting things that we get to discover here. Some fun insights, in fact, that people don't think about, but some really good teaching that we get to learn in here. So verse 1, they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing of the land of Egypt. So they're moving through the area. While the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and the whole congregation, of the children of Israel, murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. So they're complaining now about the conditions of what's going on. Let's look at verse 3. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So this is something interesting. Excuse me. This kind of goes back to the idea of bondage versus freedom. Yes, they were in bondage in Egypt. Yes, they worked insane hours. They didn't have a lot of personal property. They weren't allowed a lot of personal freedoms, but they were fed. They were taken care of with food. Now they're out in this area where there's freedom, and they're responsible for their own food, and now they don't know what to do. So this is actually an interesting point, because even when, if you look back, something that you could say is a more modern time is actually when the Soviet Union collapsed. When Russia became more of a democracy, people over there really had a hard time with democracy. Not that democracy is not a good thing, but they did not know what it meant to have freedoms, to make choices. They just knew for most of their lives that the government gave you food, the government gave you a job, the government gave you a house. You just kind of went through life and did what the government said, and everything worked out okay. But now they have to make choices, and they have to have freedom, and which means more responsibility and accountability and things. They struggled with that for a while. A lot of people wanted to go back to more communism because it was safer. So there's an interesting point that I think is not brought out very often in here, talking about this idea that freedom versus safety or comfort. And I'm not saying one side is better than the other side. What I'm saying is that oftentimes in our lives we have these challenges come up, and sometimes we seek safety more than we seek freedom. And vice versa. Sometimes we seek freedom more than we seek safety. I wouldn't say it's a right or wrong answer on this. It's a personal choice that you have to make. And this is what the children of Israel are experiencing at this time as well, is now they have freedom. They were so excited to be liberated and free from bondage. They prayed for a long time for it to happen. Now it's here. Now they're freaking out because they're responsible for themselves and they don't know what to do. They're struggling. Granted, it is a desert area. I'm not saying that they can't go out and kill food and take care of themselves, because they know how to kill animals and to do things. But they're in a desert and they're struggling. So they say in here, of course, if we look at that in verse 3, that they wish they could sit by the flesh pots. This is basically areas where they could get meat. They could eat bread. Now, meat sometimes means animal meat, and meat sometimes actually means bread or grains. It's important to realize that in the ancient world, grains were actually thick and hearty. and they garnered a lot of protein from them. So some of the protein in their diet came from grains, and some protein came from animal meats. So they had a very different type of food that they ate that we eat today. Most of the grains we eat today, like when you think of grain, you think of wheat or flour. Most of the wheat that the average person in the developed world eats today is a hybridized wheat that's basically all starch. It's just sugar. There's no protein in it anymore. There's nothing else there. So you've got to find heirloom wheat or other types of grains that are more heirloom, the older types, to actually get more substance out of it. But grain used to actually have quite a bit of protein in it. So they sometimes would call it meat, basically eating bread. But they're talking about here that they are eating meat. They basically could eat to their heart's content. They had plenty of food. They didn't have to worry about it. They were taken care of in that sense, basically. And now they're murmuring because they don't have food. They're struggling. So verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, so this is a revelation to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk my law or no. So this is an important thing is God is going to say, he's told Moses, I am going to provide bread for them. I will rain from heaven, basically. And then the people can go out and they can gather so much of it per day so they can consume it, but not more, because I'm testing them. I want to see if they'll keep my commandments or not. So if they're going to follow me or not. So this is a test. He's going to provide it for them. And then this is going to happen here. So he says in verse 5, it shall come to pass that on the sixth day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and that shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So they'll have a certain amount each day that they will gather. And then on the sixth day, which on our calendar would be a Saturday, you would gather twice as much, basically. So this is an interesting part of that rule. Verse 6, and Moses and Aaron said unto all the children of Israel, at even, meaning in the evening, then ye shall know that the Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning, then ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that ye murmur against us? Verse 8, Moses said, this shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. For that the Lord heareth your murmurings which ye murmur against him. And what are ye? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. Mainly, 7 and 8 are kind of a similar thing, basically. Moses and Aaron are now explaining to the people, okay, here's what the Lord's going to do for you. He's going to give you bread or meat, basically. He's going to give you food to eat. But he only wants you to collect so much of it at a time. Basically, here's the rules. Verse 9, and Moses spake unto Aaron, saying to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he hath heard your murmurings. Verse 10, it came to pass as Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, so this is Moses told Aaron, gather the people together. So he gathers the people together, and then they look towards the wilderness area, and a cloud appears, and now Moses is being taught by the Lord through that cloud. Verse 12, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, at even ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread. And ye know that I am the Lord your God. So at night I'm going to give you meat to eat, actual animal meat, and then in the day you'll have bread. Verse 13, and it came to pass that at even the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. So that night, a bunch of quails come into camp, and they're all over the place. And they can kill those quail and keep them and cook them for food. So they're eating meat, which is probably a very welcome sight for these people. This actually is interesting because we have an analogous story in when the early saints in the 1800s crossed the plains over to the Salt Lake Valley. They were hungry, and they had a miracle of quails appear to them as well. If you go look that up in, I believe it's in book 1 of the Saints, volume 1 of the church history. So they actually had something similar, and you can go read their stories about what that was like, maybe give you some analogy and ideas for how things happened with the children of Israel. Okay, verse 14, when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. Now, hoarfrost is a type of frost that they get. Basically, there's a small little things that they're getting on the ground, basically. There's some ideas and thoughts of what manna might be considered. We'll talk about those here in a little bit. Verse 15, and when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, it is manna, for they wist not what it was. Or basically, they're saying, what is it? And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord hath given to you to eat. So when we look at this, they were to gather. Here's their commandments. Here's what's going on with this. They were to gather just what they needed. If they hoarded it, the extra went bad the next day. So that was part of what happened here. It was a gift of God and not to be used otherwise. And God takes care of our necessities so we can be free to study the gospel and help other people. You can even look up Matthew 22, 2 through 14, get some more examples of this. Be free with the things God has given to us is a good message for us to learn from this section here. So as we look at this, they saw the manna on the ground, these little almost balls, so small round things, and Moses saying, that's the bread, gather it up. So verse 16, this is the thing which the Lord hath commanded, gather it every man according to his eating, an omer for every man, so there's a unit of measurement, according to the number of your persons, take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. So they're just saying that they got the right amount, basically, and they brought it in based on how many people were in their family. Verse 19, and Moses said, let no man leave of it till the morning. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses. That's a unfortunately common theme that we hear. But some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moses was wroth with them. So they didn't take care of it the way they were supposed to, and some of it went bad on them, basically. Verse 21, and they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. When the sun waxed hot, it melted. So they had to get this bread in. They had to take care of it, basically prepare it in a way that it would preserve and not go bad. But those that didn't preserve it, it went bad. It turned into worms and stank. And in the sunlight, it was hot and it would melt, basically dissolve. So what could this manna be? There's been talk of this in lots of scholarly circles as to what could manna be. You know, I think in our mind, when we think of bread, we're thinking, oh, look, there's like a small loaf of bread on the ground. And that's not necessarily what this was. These were probably small little things that they were given to eat, like bite-sized type ideas. There are some ideas some people have that there's a certain type of a bug, basically, that makes its nest up in trees, and it eats the trees, basically feeds off of trees and things, and when it secretes things out, it secretes kind of a honey-like mixture that just falls to the ground, kind of like a dew. Some people think maybe that's manna, this idea of they were a lot more abundant back then, and they were all over, and they would kind of poop all over the place. It's kind of this worm poop, and then that's what they would call manna, because it was like a honey, basically, kind of like some honey. It was really sweet, sugary, thick type of stuff. We don't know 100% for sure what it is. There's a lot of ideas out there of what could manna be. In fact, put in the notes if you've heard of some other ideas of what manna might have been for the children of Israel. There's a lot of ideas and potential things that are out there. Could it have been like a bite-sized type piece of bread? Yeah, possible. Possible. That is a possibility. Okay, now verse 22, and it came to pass that on the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. So we're following this law. Those who again didn't prepare it, they lost it, which means now they're starving. They have to wait till the next day to get more bread. Verse 23, and he said unto them, this is that which the Lord had said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and seethe that ye will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to keep until the morning. So what he's saying basically here is on Saturday, you're going to gather twice as much manna, and you're going to prepare all of it. And then you're going to keep that half that's extra to be eaten on Sunday, because you're not to cook on Sunday. You are to rest on Sunday, basically. And that's what they were supposed to do, basically. So verse 24, and they laid it up till the morning, and Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So that which they prepared for the next day was fine when they went into the next day. All the rest of the days, if they gathered too much, it went bad. But on the Sabbath, it didn't. Verse 25, and Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord, and today ye shall not find it in the field. So there's no manna that comes on Sunday, basically. So if you didn't gather it Saturday and prepare it, you're toast. You're going to have to wait till Monday to eat. So verse 26, 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the seventh day for to gather, and they found none. So some didn't listen to what Moses said. They didn't think through and follow those commandments. They just thought they'll just do what they've always done and it'll always work out, not realizing that there was a difference, there was a law change. How often sometimes do we get into habits that end up causing us to not fully keep the commandments? We keep it most of the way, but not all the way. If you have some ideas of that, you can put those in the comments as well, what you think are common traps of habits that people might fall into. So verse 28, and the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the sixth day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. I'm sure there was quite a few people in that first week that they did this that were struggling with this. So they went, they're not kidding. There is nothing on the day, on the Sabbath day. So they got in trouble for that. And Moses had to say, no, guys, don't go looking for manna on the Sabbath. Eat what you prepared on Saturday, that extra for Sabbath. And they're like, oh, okay. So those that did, again, they followed those commandments and did right. Those who didn't are stuck. If they didn't gather twice as much on Saturday, or maybe they thought, oh, look, I can make this on Saturday, but I'll go gather more on Sunday to gain more, to increase what I have. It didn't work, basically. And if you didn't have, again, if you took more than you were told to, more than an omer is worth, then it went bad. So you couldn't carry it over to the next day, basically. You weren't allowed to hoard it and accumulate more than anybody else. So some really interesting ideas that we can think of with understanding this. Like we talked about, God's gifts are to be given freely, and he gives us the opportunity to share those gifts, to do more with those gifts. If we follow him, he will bless us and help us as we do share those gifts with others, basically. But we need to follow those rules and guidelines that he's put in place to govern some of these things. So just watch out, as we're keeping commandments and doing things. Sometimes maybe we can go beyond that mark and kind of go a little too far into uh, trying to keep stuff. Maybe we try to hoard things for ourselves, or we try to think, oh, I'll just get a little bit more of this. It's not going to be that big of a deal if I do a little bit more over here, a little bit more over there. But we got to realize that straight, narrow path that Christ has given for us to follow, those commandments, it is a straight and a narrow path because it has defined boundaries. Everything on both sides of the path that's off the path is Satan's territory. So we can go to the right too far and to the left too far and not and fall off the path, basically. So we have to be more understanding of what is that guidance that the Lord gives us and follow that as best we can. Now, verse 31, and the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, basically, which is in the Bible dictionary. You can look that up too. And it was like coriander seed, white. And the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. So again, there's kind of that honey sweet flavor. Had a little bit of thickness to it, kind of like wafers with honey, which is probably like a honeycomb type thing. But it's white like a coriander seed. So that's why a lot of people think that the leftovers of these bugs that are eating the sap and things off this tree could be considered manna. And they drop from the ground, so it's as if they're raining. So that could be a logical explanation for manna. We have to understand that just because we live in a world of logic and physics and rules doesn't mean that God can't perform a miracle without needing some of those things. He follows the logic and rules, but sometimes he does it in a way that we don't fully understand yet. How could that fit within the laws and rules? Once we understand it, then it makes more sense. But we sometimes don't fully understand how he can apply those laws and rules to help us. But he can do great things to support us and help us. Verse 32, and Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commandeth, fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. So there's a little bit to be kept. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot and put an omer full of manna therein and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. So this is going to be preserved for people to see in the future. Verse 34, as the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. Now the testimony, laid it before the testimony, what could that mean? Well, in the Bible dictionary, it refers to this verse when it's talking about the Ark of the Covenant. So there's a good chance there's a pot in the Ark of the Covenant full of manna, this real legit actual manna that they got, that is in there, and it's been preserved so future generations can see what it was like. We don't have the Ark of the Covenant right now. Best we know, it's in heaven, so we don't have access to that. But that's what they're talking about here, is it's put in the Ark of the Covenant, that box, the sacred box. Verse 35, and the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to a land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Now, an omer is 1/10 part of an ephah. And an ephah, you can look that up in the Bible dictionary as well to see what kind of measurement was that, basically. Verse 35 is kind of out of context a little bit. This isn't saying that they wandered for 40 years and then got to the land and then wandered for another 40 years. So they're just, verse 35, you have to realize, is kind of saying for the next 40 years, they were fed this, basically, even though there's a whole lot that we're still going on. Verse 35 kind of jumps ahead and explains that for the next 40 years, which is going to be way till the end of the book of Exodus, basically, and really the end of the 5 books of Moses, is going to consume that 40 years. And so it's going to be a long time, and they're going to be eating manna the whole time, basically. That's what that really comes down to. So what kinds of things do you think of when you think of manna for your own life? In what ways is God providing bread for you or providing necessities to help you in your life? You know, when we look at this section of the stories of the children of Israel is important because we we get some analogies that are used a couple times in the New Testament. The book of Matthew, I think, has a little bit in there as well. Um, there's references made in the Old Testament to the manna also, realizing that this is the bread of life. If you eat this, you're going to survive. If you don't eat it, you're going to die. And understanding the Savior used this to talk about how, your forefathers ate manna and they still died eventually. But if you eat of what I bring, you will live forever. Talking about how he overcomes spiritual and physical death for us with the atonement and is able to help us more. That he is the bread of life, which Bethlehem kind of means that basically. So he is this idea of the man again is another symbolic representation of the Savior and what he's going to do for the children of Israel. So some really cool analogies and things that we can look at for that. If you have some other ideas and thoughts, let us know in the comments what you think, and we look forward to reading those. Thanks. We'll see you in the next chapter.